Hello my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today we have another book talk video to share with you guys. If you've been around my channel for a while, you know I love this author. Today we are talking about How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I've got book talks on this channel, I think for 3 other of his books, and I just love him because you know what? Let me tell you a little something. I read a lot of thrillers. A lot of horror. And sometimes, especially with the thrillers, as much as I love them, they tend to get a little formulaic, a little repetitive. You know it's going to happen. You know this is going to happen, this is going to happen, there's going to be a twist, the end. So I've noticed for the past year or so, I've really taken a shining to reading books that are a little different, a little weird. I'm liking just weird books where people just decide they're going to try something new and they throw it and they see what happens. That has led to me loving Grady Hendrix. It's led to my love of Mona Awad. Who else? Riley Sager. A lot of the books of his that people hate, like The House Across the Lake, I loved that because it was just crazy enough. It was just crazy enough. We'll just leave it at that. Katrina Ward, I love her. And yeah, on this channel, I've had this channel for 8 years now. So I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thrillers. And I've just wanted something different. And I know this one, out of all of his books, I feel like this one is the most divisive. People either love it or they don't. And it was a 5-star read for me. It was 5 stars. It was touch and go for a while. There were parts in the middle that I was like, But by the time I got to that ending, I was like, this is 5 stars. I don't care. So we're going to do it how we normally do it here. And also, sorry, before I move on, just to touch back on that, how I'm really into, the weirder the better for the books. If you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments down below. For things in the vein of Grady Hendrix, Mona Awad, Katrina Ward, things like that. Let me know, because I would love to check them out. There's more authors, of course, that I'm forgetting, but those are the ones I'm really loving. Anyway, so yes, we're going to do this like we normally do. First, I'll give you a synopsis, my thoughts, no spoilers, and then we'll move on to talking about the spoilers. I was telling my husband all about them over lunch, and he was like, that sounds insane. I was like, yeah, it's insane from beginning to end. And I loved every second of it. Now, first of all, Grady Hendrix, whether you like the meat of his stories or not, he's a fantastic writer. I feel like it would be difficult to argue that. And the stories are so quick, they're easy to read, they're fast-paced. And I love that about them. And they're all incredibly eccentric. So, in this book, we follow along with a woman named Louise. In the very first chapter, we meet her, and she's just found out she's pregnant. She's not married, she's 34, and she's having this baby. She calls and tells her parents about it, and they're like, we're on our way, we're gonna come and see you. They love her so much. She's moved over 3,000 miles away from home, just because she wanted a chance to kind of be her own person, get away from her family, and just live her own life. So, but they're coming to see her. And as they're buying cribs and getting everything ready for the baby, Louise kind of thinks, I've put walls up, but now that I'm going to be a mom and my mom's going to become a grandmother, she really had hope that there was going to be a mending in their relationship. And at the end of that chapter, she's kind of like, we got years and years to figure this out. And then the final sentence is, we actually only got 5 years. And so then we skip on to, 5 years later, and she gets a call from her brother, Mark. Now, Louise and her brother, Mark, are estranged for the most part. Him calling her now is the first time she's spoken to him in 3 years. They just grew up very different. She grew up really resentful and bitter, because she thought that she was, such a hardworking girl. She worked hard at school. She worked hard in her extracurriculars. And her brother kind of in her eyes, was just a giant mess up all the time. He was lazy. He would start things and never finish them, and she really resented him for that. And then as they grew older, they just grew apart. So now he's calling her to tell her that their parents have died. This is not a spoiler. This is like the premise of the book. He calls to tell her their parents have died. And it's funny because the thing about Grady Hendrix is it's horror, but it's also comedy. Like, he doesn't take himself too seriously. And I love that about him. And he always makes me laugh. So her brother calls her up and she's like, what do you want? Like, and he's like, it's about mom and dad. Well, first of all, he says, sit down. And she was already sitting. So because he told her to sit down, she stands up. And then he begins what he's about to tell her with just saying, so like, it's about mom and dad. What about them? They're in a better place. And she's like, they're in a better place. What do you mean? For some reason, that cracked me up. So he goes on to tell her that they've died. They were in an accident together and they've died. So he's like, you gotta come home. And she's like, when did this happen? And he's like, yesterday morning. And she's like, oh my God. Okay, I'm coming. So she brings her now 5-year-old daughter, Poppy, over to her dad's house and she goes home. And from there, what we have is the story of these two siblings trying to tolerate each other while also trying to go through their family's home so that they can sell this house. But as it turns out, and as the title would lead you to believe, there's something weird going on in the house. And there's something weird about their mom in general. This is like the creepiest thing anyone could ever do in my mind, but she was a puppeteer. And like, not that being a puppeteer in general is creepy, but like, you need to know she had hundreds of them. She would make them. They filled her house. In every room there are puppets and dolls. Anyway, so Mark and Louise have to go through this house, try to deal with each other and deal with these puppets. And it's awful. But I love the book. And I will say I was a bit put off by the puppets. I was like, haunted puppets. But honestly, I loved it. It was fun in the kind of way, like if you were a kid and you read R.L. Stine books, or like, I was gonna say, or Christopher Pike, not so much Christopher Pike, definitely R.L. Stine books. It's the same sort of energy, and just more grown up, more swearing, more adult themes. And it was a lot of fun. So if that sounds like something that you would be interested in, because what I need to say as well is, more than anything, more than a haunting, more than, you know, creepy dolls and puppets, this is the story of two people losing their parents. This is a look at grief and the way that grief manifests. Not just their grief, but sort of generational grief within their family. And as silly as it gets with the puppets, there were times when I, especially at the ending, where I was crying reading about these puppets. Grady Hendrix has a way of taking something so sort of out there and tying it to something so human and so relatable. And I think he's just a really, really talented writer, and I can't wait to see what he comes out with next. So if you do not want any spoilers, now's the time to click away. For those of you that have already read it and want to talk about the spoilers, let's get on into it. Now listen, we're not going to be able to go through every single thing that happens in this book, are we? So much happens. So much happens. But we're gonna do as best as we can, because there's a lot. There's a lot to talk about. So, first of all, they get home, or Louise gets home. She's dealing with her brother. She hates him. The feeling appears to be mutual. And the Wills, after the funeral, which she fought tooth and nail with her brother about what to do with their parents' remains, and eventually she gave in and she was like, fine, do whatever you want. And then he plans it the way he wanted, and she has to change her heart. She's like, you know what? That was beautiful and they would have loved it. And she kind of has to concede to herself that he knew them better than she did at the end, because he stayed home and she moved away. So she missed a lot of things. But after that comes the reading of the will. This was a stressful part. So, because her parents died together, there were 2 wills that need to be read. And so the first, the lawyer, who's their like cousin through marriage, I think, or just a cousin, he's like, okay, so there's 2 wills, so I'm going to email them to you now, take a look. So the first one is their dad's, and in his will it says, upon his passing, everything obviously would go to his wife, but then in the event that she predeceased him, everything was to go to Louise. And Louise is like, okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. And she says to her brother, listen, Mark, don't worry. I'm going to share everything with you. We'll sell the house, split it. And then the lawyer's like, right, but listen, as it is, your dad died on impact. So in that moment, everything got transferred to your mother. And so now it's her will we need to look at because she died on the way to the hospital. So she outlived him. So they're like, okay. And when they read that one says that everything goes to Mark. And Mark's like, that's right. You left, you get nothing. And he's having a big thing. At this point, this Mark, he's one of the most unlikable characters that I've ever read. I hated him as much as Louise did. And then it's a true testament to Grady's talent that by the halfway point of the book, Mark has won you over. You're like, yes, Mark. Yes. And I love that. I love that. So, Louise finds out that, you know, Mark gets everything except for their mother's art collection. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to make this guy suffer. I'm going to take my time getting this art out of here. I'm going to take years getting this art out of here so he can't sell because she's getting a little fed up. So one thing we learn about their mother during this time is that I know I already said she had a ton of puppets, but she had one particular puppet named Pumpkin, who she'd had since she was a little girl and who is an absolute nightmare fuel. Like, it's just the description of it. I was like, that's no. And then inside the house there's these 2 dolls. They're called the Mark and Louise dolls. They're like huge lifelike dolls of these 2 kids that their mom made. Like, it's just horrible. Horrible things all around. So there's just a ton of stuff. They're being, like, there's so much stuff. I don't even know what to tell you and what to leave out. So we'll leave out all the doll stuff. There's a lot of weird doll stuff. There's weird noises in the attic. The attic is boarded up, which I feel like is never a good sign. That's how you know something terrible has happened in this house. And whatever it was is now up in the attic. And they're just tormented by the noises. They try to get their aunt in, who's a realtor. She's like, listen, well, first of all, Louise goes home. Or no, she's going to go home. And then Mark calls her and he's like, listen, we need to talk. She's like, I don't need to talk to you, you greedy bitch. I don't need to talk to you. And he's like, no, please listen. If you won't listen to me, listen to our aunt. They had her on FaceTime. And she's like, listen. So she's a realtor, right? She's like, listen, I've talked to Mark. He's going to split the money with you. And Mark's like, I'll give her 25%. And then the aunt's like, you're going to give her 50%. So this whole back and forth. And then, so she's like, listen, let me go in, appraise the house, see what's going on in there. So she goes in, she does it, and she's like, no, we can't sell it like this. There's some spooky stuff going on in here. No one's going to want to buy it. And we don't want to sell it to developers. We want to sell it for more to a nice family who can move in here and have a nice life. Anyway, from there, things just escalate. Louise is attacked by taxidermy squirrels. Pumpkin is getting ready to terrorize everybody once again. We get this backstory from Mark during his time away because he went to university after he begged his parents to send him there. And it was so expensive. They finally send him there. He drops out before the year's up. Louise holds that against him and she's like, no, you're lazy, you're useless. And so he tells her what happened. he took Pumpkin with him, and it was a whole thing, and he terrorized the whole town, basically. And we also learned that the reason that Mark is so just upset with her all the time and tormenting her all the time is because when he was very young, she tried to kill him. She didn't, Pumpkin did, because at this point, so it was her mom's special puppet growing up. Louise gets born, Louise's mom passes it on to her. Now this puppet starts making her do really bad things. Like, they're visiting someone during Christmas time, they go outside to play, there's a pond not too far away. And so this puppet, Pumpkin is telling her, like, come with me. So her and the brother go down by the pond, and Pumpkin tells her, tell him to go out on the water. And she's like, yeah, Mark, go on out. And she's like, Pumpkin's like, tell him to put his leg up. She's like, put your leg up, Mark. And he falls through the water. And then instead of helping him or getting help, she goes inside. Now, she's very young at this point, too. And her mom's like, where's your brother? And she's like, I don't know, in the bathroom, I guess. So he's out there drowning. Eventually, they find him. And her mom's like, what? What is going on? Like, why didn't you help him? And it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. Anyway, so Pumpkin's been terrorizing them for ages. As time goes by, we start to see that, like, Pumpkin doesn't like when things are different. He's, like, he didn't like Mark because Mark came and changed everything. Because, you know, first it was Louise and her parents, that was fine. Then Mark comes, everything changes. And then leading up to their death, what happened was Nancy, that's Louise's mom, her husband, so Eric, Louise's dad, he got in an accident and he was walking with a cane, limping, and Nancy had to put a lot of time into caring for him. Well, Pumpkin didn't like that. Please know, as I'm telling you this story, I'm aware of how insane it sounds. Anyways, Pumpkin didn't like it. So we pieced together that that must be why he was put up in the attic and locked away, because they were getting scared of him. And so we start to think, okay, Pumpkin must have attacked Eric, and Nancy was taking him to the hospital. Because when Louise arrived at the house, like, her dad's cane was on the floor, her mom's purse was on the counter. Like, it was very obvious they left in a hurry. They decide they're gonna have one final meal at the house, and at the end of the night, Mark's like, okay, I'm going home. You probably shouldn't stay in the house. Because, like I'm saying, there's noises, there's weirdness. Bad vibes in this house. So Mark's like, you shouldn't stay here. You should go back to the hotel. But Louise is like, no, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to try to get everything cleaned out so we can get this sale on the road. So she goes to bed and then she wakes up. And Pumpkin is crawling onto the bed and he's got a needle. And he's getting ready to attack her. And she is screaming and Pumpkin jams the needle in her eye. And she's screaming, and then all of a sudden the door bursts open. It's Mark. He's got a gun. He shoots Pumpkin multiple times. And they get out of there. She was in her pajamas, so in his truck he finds like a pair of sweatpants. And they go to Waffle House. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. She's very aware that they both look like hell. Like, she knows she looks like she's been through it, and then she's wearing his grungy old clothes. She looks at her brother. She's like, he's slightly cleaner, but he definitely looks like someone who would have shot a puppet at 3 o'clock in the morning. She's freaking out because she's worried she's blind. Because she had a needle jammed into her eye. It's now out. She's wailing, as you would be. You know, that's fair. And there was one line that made me laugh out loud, too. The waitress, like, asks if she's okay. Mark's like, I'm great, thanks for asking. And Louise is like, I'm blind. Like... So the waitress, of course, is like, okay, I'm going to leave you two to it. So then they order, they talk, and they decide that they're going to... Well, at this point, they're like, okay, we've done it. We can go home now, get the trash out. You shot Pumpkin, like, he's done. He's done. But he's not done. Shooting him is not enough. So they go home, they can't find him. It's a whole thing. Eventually, there's this scene where they're like, okay, they can't find him. They're like, he must be up in the basement, right? So they go up. Mark goes up first. By the time Louise gets up there, Mark is crouched on the floor, and he's like, I won't do that. And she's like, oh no, he's talking to the puppet. And he's like, I won't do that, because if I do that, then you'll hurt her. So now we're like, oh my God, the puppet wants him to put him on so he can, I don't know what. So we quickly find out what. And that's that he has a hammer, this puppet. He ends up on Mark's hand, swinging this hammer at Louise. And they end up downstairs. She's literally gotten bashed in the head with a hammer. She's beat up. They get into the garage, and like Pupkin via Mark's body is going to kill her. And Mark kind of snaps too, because when Pupkin's on whoever's hand, they kind of their eyes glaze over. They're not there. It's just Pupkin. I mean, Mark kind of comes back into his body, and he's like, oh my God, oh my God. He's like, the saw, get the saw. And she's like, when do what with it? And he's like, cut it off. So she does. She cuts his arm off in order to separate Mark from the puppet. Now we learn very quickly that Mark had said that in a fit of panic, and with the hope that they would be able to reattach the hand. He finds out in the hospital that they are not able to reattach the hand. And he has a moment where he was like, I can't believe you did that to me. And she was like, I had no other choice. And he's like, I never would have cut your hand off. And she's like, you told me to. So it's this whole thing. So then she goes, she gets the puppet, she burns it, the whole thing. She gets Mark home, and then she's ready to go home to San Francisco to be with her daughter, Poppy. At this point, there's still like 100 pages left. And I'm like, what now? Maybe even more than 100 pages. And anyway, we find out, so Poppy goes home. She goes home, and her daughter's at the house with her ex, Ian, her father. And she goes in, and she had expected Poppy to be there like, hello. But she's not. And so she says to Ian, she's like, where's Poppy? And he's like, oh, she's in her room. So she goes in, she opens the door, and sitting on her bed is Poppy, and on Poppy's hand is Pupkin. And Louise freaks out. She lunges at the girl. She's trying to pull it off. Ian's standing there looking at her like, what the hell is going on here? And Louise is like, where did this come from? Where did this come from? And he's like, I don't know. Poppy made it with my mother. They were doing crafts one day, and they made it. And Louise is like, how did they make it? And he's like, I don't know. It was just an idea Poppy had in mind. She directed my mom on how to make it. And Louise is like, this looks exactly like a puppet that my mother had. And Ian's like, great, she must have remembered it. And Louise is like, no, I told her to never show that puppet to Poppy. And he's like, okay, well, I don't know what to tell you, girl. And so then Louise is like, okay, I gotta pull my life together so that Ian will leave, not think I'm insane, and then I can deal with Poppy and the puppet on my own. He leaves. Poppy's asleep. She goes and tries to grab the puppet. No luck. Like, no luck. And then the next day, she sees Poppy going into the kitchen with Pumpkin on her arm. Pumpkin grabs the knife and then cuts Poppy's arm. Louise is like, oh, hell no. This can't happen. She goes and calls Mark. Mark's like, yeah. He's still not thrilled with her about his arm. She tells him. He's like, what do you mean? So he's like, I'll call you back in a minute. Time goes by. She calls back. She's like, why didn't you call me? He's like, sorry, I was trying to figure it out. He's like, you need to come back here. And she's like, not a silver chance in hell am I coming back there. And he's like, you have to, because our family's going to help us. Because throughout the whole book, anytime she deals with her cousins, her aunts, her great aunt, they're all like, your family's a little weird. And she's like, my family's not a little weird. But now, as we know, her family's very weird. So she tries to get Poppy and Pupkin back home. They have trouble at TSA, at the airport. TSA is like, you got to get her to take that puppet off. She's like, she's not going to take that puppet off. And so right before they went to the airport, actually, she got to talking to Pupkin, and he told her that he wants Nancy. Where's Nancy? Nancy, of course, being the little girl who loved him, Louise's mom, when she was a little girl. And she's like, listen, bozo, Nancy is dead, and she's not coming back. This doesn't mean a lot to Pumpkin. He's like, I want to see her anyway. So she's like, okay, listen. They get through TSA eventually. She convinces them to pat her down instead of having her go through the scanner. She lies and says that her father just died and they're headed to the funeral. On the plane, Pupkin, on Poppy's hand, starts freaking out, kicking, throwing, screaming. The stewardess is finally like, listen, if you can't get this whole situation under control, we're going to land this plane at the next airport and you're going to have to leave. So Lisa's like, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Pupkin. So she just Pupkin. She says, if you don't shut up, you're not going to get to see Nancy. So they finally get there. They go. Now, earlier on we learned about this whole thing about Louise's mom's brother, Freddie, died when he was very little. That's going to become important now. So the aunt thinks it's a demon. She's like, listen, I know all about demons. I can help you get rid of this demon. So she's finally trying to talk to this demon. And she's like, tell me your name, demon. And he won't tell her. Well, first he starts naming everybody in the room. She's like, no, tell me your name. Eventually, he's like, Freddie. That, of course, was Nancy's brother that died. And they're like, oh my God. So then the aunt's like, listen, this isn't a demon, it's a ghost. I don't know anything about ghosts, so you're kind of on your own. So Louise goes to her great aunt who's currently in the hospital, and she's trying to find out all the tea that she can about what happened to Freddie, where he was buried, like all the information so that they can find a way to take Freddie's spirit out of this puppet and get it to move on into the afterlife. What they find out is that he got killed while Nancy, his sister, was watching them. They were both very little. Freddie was 5 years old and he got killed. And when they were getting ready to bury him, kind of at the last minute, like he had a closed casket funeral, and then as it's getting ready to bury him, like literally put his body in the ground, his mother, so Louise's grandmother, was like, no, I can't do this. I can't leave him here. And she buried him, coffin and all, in the backyard of their house, which explains, because this house has been in the family for years. And Aunt Honey, Louise's great aunt, had always been like, you can't sell this house. Promise me you won't sell this house. So now we know why. It's because Freddie's back there tormenting everybody through a puppet. And so then there's this whole to-do. Eventually Louise finds Freddie's burial ground, the spot where he's buried, and she digs it up, and she opens the top and they see the body lying in there. At this point it's just like remains, but she can see it had been wearing a little sweater, and that just kills her because she's like, oh my gosh, his mother didn't want him to be cold. Like, that's so sad. So then he's showing Pupkin, aka Freddie. She's like, this is you. This is where you are. Let me read you this part. It's you, Louise shouted through the rain at Pupkin. It's you, Freddie. Pupkin turned his face from the body of the little boy to Louise, then back to the case. The rain beat down on them like clubs. Black paint dripped from Pupkin's chin as his features blurred and disappeared. You have to go now, Pupkin, Louise said. It's time to go home. Pupkin shivered on the end of Poppy's arm, a sad, peeling, wet thing looking at his own corpse. Pupkin, no go, he said. Pupkin, stay and play. There's no one left, Louise said. They're all gone. Pupkin real, Pupkin alive, he cheered. No, Louise said, too exhausted to say more. Why? Because when your body gets very hurt very badly, it stops working. And then that means you go away forever, and that's what happened to you. No, he whined, not fair. No, Louise agreed. Not fair. And then, so it says, why, he asked again, and it was a child's voice, lost with no way home. And in that moment, Louise thought of the Velveteen Rabbit, and she knew why she had always hated it. Being loved didn't mean you were alive. People loved lots of inanimate things, stuffed animals, cars, puppets. Being alive meant something else. Because you're real, Pupkin, Louise said, and nothing real can last forever. That's how you know you're real. Because one day you die. Rain smashed down on the three of them sitting in the mud. Finally, Pupkin spoke in a voice so small, Louise almost didn't hear him over the rain. I'm scared, he said. And it just goes on, her saying goodbye to him, getting him to move on. And that part just, you know, you just picture the spirit of this little boy who doesn't know where his sister's gone and he misses her so much. And he's so scared to cross over. Anyway, he finally does. I liked the ending a lot. After that, they do a final walkthrough of the house after it's been gutted and renovated. And when she stands in the kitchen, she can smell the scent of baking, this special bread her father used to make. And earlier in the book, she mentions that bread, and she talks about how whenever she would smell him baking, she knew that everything was going to be okay. So you kind of get, that's what she takes from the smell. But Mark has a moment where he's like, I smell that. He's like, I don't know what it is, energy, memories, whatever it is. And you can tell he's scared to leave the house in case they're leaving their father behind. But Louise just said, it's time to go. And then that was kind of the ending. One thing I also really liked about the ending, Grady, oh my goodness, Grady is so clever. So at the very, very end, we get the like funeral pamphlets for Nancy and Eric. And it's, you know, it's like the program for the songs that are sung, the speakers that are going to speak. But this effectively works as the acknowledgements page for Grady and for the book. And I thought that was so cute. Like here at the end it says, we would like to extend thanks to the Hendrix family for the beautiful flowers donated to the sanctuary. Julia, Kat, Anne, and David. The Fellowship of Puppeteers wish to extend their warm gratitude to the Bus family who opened their home for so many guests during this difficult time. Barbara, John, Johnny, Leon, Effie Lou, and it goes on. And you just know those are the people in his real life that he's thanking. In the acknowledgements, that's so cute. Anyway, there we go. It was a wild ride. And if you enjoyed this and you would like to hear me talk about it more, well, friends, I've got it good and tabbed up. Because on Thursday of this week, January 25th, I'm going to be recording the next episode of my podcast with my co-host, Krista. And that'll be going up on Spotify probably Friday or Saturday. And we have a lot of fun in that podcast. And I'll leave the link down below. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I always appreciate it when you take the time to spend time with me here in my video. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye.